Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She's the author of the book Braving Therapy, no other than Miss Linda Feig Knipe. Welcome to Book 101, Miss Linda, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me. Um, my name is Linda Feig Knipe, and I wrote the book Braving Therapy about my experience with PTSD um, and the experience of therapy from finding it all the way through to its conclusion, um, being more self aware.
Miss Linda Feig, thank you so much for sharing your book to the world and hoping for more and more and more books to come. Why did you choose the word braving in your title of the significant to you?
Um, because for me, um, therapy was the therapy for um, why I was there required a lot of bravery to not only start it but to stick with it through all of the really hard parts of therapy. I had PTSD for a uh, break in and rape when I was 15 or 20 years younger than when I finally went to therapy. And um, going back and dealing with the trauma of all of that, I developed PTSD, and um, having to actually go through all of the really uncomfortable thoughts and emotions that you have was a really daunting. It was the most difficult thing I've done in my life, and I knew because I was in a program to become a counselor, I knew that I had to stick with it. I had to stick with it for my own health, and I had to stick with it in order to be a good counselor. And so I did, but it was tough. I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety, and a lot of resistance from myself about uh, being vulnerable and talking about things that I was ashamed of. So so it required bravery. So that's why it's called braving therapy.
Certainly. So, Miss Linda, how do you, or yes, how do you find strength and courage to confront your buried trauma?
Uh, it was it was kind of two steps forward, one step back. I was in therapy for PTSD and the symptoms, and I had a lot of crazy symptoms, which I talk about. And people who struggle with PTSD uh, have a lot of really difficult symptoms. So I knew I couldn't live with those. It was um, very disruptive to try and live with active PTSD. Um, but also, I had a therapist who um, was really good at. He really kind of just stepped back and waited for me to talk, and so he displayed what's called in therapeutic terms unconditional positive regard, which is that even though I had a lot of shame and was not able to talk about things even to myself, he always regarded me in a very positive and accepting way. And it takes a long time, but over over the time of talking about things that are really difficult to talk about and that you're really ashamed of and you think you're going to be judged about, if somebody is always accepting you and regarding you positively and letting you know that you are okay, that you do feel safer talking about things. So that's how I started to be able to open up. I also finally realized that I was not going to get through the depression and anxiety I was dealing with unless I started actually talking about the really hard stuff that I was holding inside of me that's toxic.
Certainly. So, Miss Linda, what was the most challenging aspect of writing about your experience with PTSD and trauma?
Um, well, I kept journals. I journaled all the time that I was in therapy, um, when I was on my own, because there was so much that was coming up, um, in the middle of the night, when you start processing everything that you've been thinking or the stuff that we discussed. So I had a lot of journals, and I went back. I got those out. It was they were 20 years old, and so revisiting all of what was going on in my head at the time, a lot of it really was crazy, but a lot of it really showed how your perspective changes. It showed um, how I was coming to new perspectives. I was talking it through for myself as well as talking it through with my therapist and other people, outside people. But that was, I described it in the book as tears left uncried when I was going back and revisiting. I also was very intimidated about putting my story out there. I'm not someone who shares easily about myself. I'm a great listener and I can draw people out, but talking about myself was intimidating, and I certainly didn't want people that I knew to read it, but it took me a couple of years to write it, and I think by the time I finally published it, I was so done with the material. I was like, I don't care who reads this. I'm good with it now. So talking and being authentic is really empowering. I'm much
Sure.
more comfortable now.
Totally true, Miss Linda. So, can you describe the moment you realized therapy was essential for your healing?
Yeah, I was so I was in a graduate class in counseling uh, when I got triggered, and it didn't. I didn't know it right away. I knew the professor had said something about rape and therapy that just was particular to my situation, and I was just like I was so taken aback, but I just wanted to get out of there. And then that I think on the way home, I had stopped at a store and I just started having um, not flashbacks, but re experiencing. Like I was experiencing someone climbing onto me. And it was just such a strong sensation. And it was kind of crazy. And I kept on telling myself, um, this is just stop thinking about this, and I started writing. That was the first time, my first sensation. I started writing, and I was writing out what I was experiencing because I couldn't make it stop. And things like that started happening. I wasn't able to eat anymore. um, and I was waking up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and I knew I couldn't go on like that, but I really didn't understand what was happening. So I went to my professor and told him what had happened, and he explained about PTSD for me. It was my first counseling class, and we hadn't talked about anything like that, so he explained it and told me that I really was going to need therapy. And um, that was very intimidating for me because right after it happened, within 6 months or a year, I went to a very uh, I had a really unfortunate experience with a therapist, and it just left me angry and bitter, and I was afraid that that would happen again. But I knew that I needed therapy for myself because I couldn't continue on the way I was. And understand, I had 3 sons and marriage, and I was working full time, and I was in the throes of feeling pretty crazy, and so I really needed to address it. But um, I was very careful when I was researching therapists, and I talked to a number of them. And finally, my therapist, who I write about a lot in the book, called me and suggested I come in and meet with him, and I make a decision after that. And I realized that when you're talking to the right person, that you know it. You can tell that you're talking to the right person because you're talking about the right things.
So, Miss Linda, what are the common misconceptions about PTSD and trauma do you hope your book address?
Um, I think people don't understand how much trauma affects us in just affect our bodies. It's not something that we can control. And that was the first thing that my professor said is you can't make yourself stop thinking about it. You can control your thoughts in a lot of regards. Like you can say, don't ruminate on this, think about something else, and pretty much manage that. But with PTSD, when we bury traumatic memories, we bury with most memories, when we put them away, we have experiences, and we have physical sensations, and we can think about those and put a narrative or a story to what we're thinking about, and then we put it into our minds, and it gets stored. And some of the stuff we keep, some of the stuff never sticks, but a lot of memories are stored somewhere in our brains. With PTSD, what happens is so shocking and so uncomfortable and scary. A lot of times there's the feeling that this might be the end of your life. That certainly happened with me. Um, and you can't, it's something that you couldn't get away from. And it's so scary and shocking and uncomfortable to think about that instead of putting a narrative to it, you just shove those sensations away as quickly as you can. Um, so they're put away without any dialogue to them, and so they just get shoved in. So I describe it in the book a number of times, and it's on the cover of the book, as the memories are like shoved into your junk closet in your mind. Like it's like when the you have guests coming over and the house is messy and you don't know what to do with everything, so you just pick it up, you throw it in a closet, and it goes to the back of the closet, and it just sits there until you do it again the next time you pick up stuff and you throw it in the closet. And that's how it is when we compartmentalize things we're really uncomfortable with. It's like taking all of those uncomfortable feelings and sensations that you don't want to think about and just shoving them into the closet in your brain and shutting the door, and you don't think about them anymore, but they're there. And so with PTSD, it's kind of like you've shoved so many things in there, that the door starts popping back open and things start falling out. And those sensations are the things that are falling out. There is no narrative. You can't think your way through those sensations. You just are going to experience them when they start. So that's kind of a description of PTSD that really resonated with me and seems to resonate with a lot of people, that there's a lot of stuff that you have shoved away in the closet of your brain. And I've had people that have reviewed the book who, the reviews that I've read, have talked about exactly that, that they have things that they just, I had trauma nurse who was talking about having read it and saying, I never really understood, but I realized that the crisis that I deal with all the time, I just shove away and then I go hike. And that's how I deal with it. And she said, I didn't realize how helpful therapy could be until I was reading through it in your book and understanding how it's affecting me. Just shoving away all of that, upsetting, scary, traumatic stuff that she's not in danger for her life, but she's dealing with other people's life and death stuff all the time.
Very well said, Miss Linda. Very well said. So, how did the writing this book contribute to your own healing and recovery?
The writing,
Yes.
um, I I really had been so that my therapy was 20 years ago, and I had wanted to write for a long time. I've always been very busy, but I really wanted to write. And when I was in a writing workshop, they said, write what you know. And I had just been explaining about PTSD to a person I knew uh, who had a family member who was experiencing it. And so it was right there. So it was what I knew, and I started writing about it. But the way I felt since I started writing this book is that I've been living in a state of self-awareness and have been blessed with having a really authentic, really healthy life for a lot of years now. Um, but I had a lot of knowledge. There was a lot of learning that came from going through therapy, and uh, with all that I wrote and thought about while it was going on, understanding I was in therapy while I was also in a graduate program for learning how to be a counselor. So I was seeing it from both sides. I would sit there in my worst moments with my therapist, having anxiety, but also paying attention to what he was doing and what he was saying and how he was doing it, and just going, this is fascinating. And so I'm able to write from that perspective of looking at it from both sides, because that's where I was when I was going through therapy. Um, I'm
So,
trying to remember exactly what the question was that you asked me.
you answered totally correct, Miss Linda. Empowering answer. So, what would be your advice for those people out there suffering from PTSD?
I think um, it is it is not easy, but it's essential to really living the life and being the person that you want to be, to get help getting through PTSD. It's the same with depression and everything. And one of the things that I have told people, and I said in the book, you need a lot of support. You can't do it on your own. Um, I believe strongly in the power of good therapy, but it is still it is still up to you who have gone through the experience to power through it, because you need to put a narrative to the sensations that you are feeling. And I didn't say this, and I'm just going to say it. I hope it's okay really quickly.
Go ahead.
The reason that the reason that those sensations come back at us, it's not just that we shoved them in the closet, but it's a really protective factor. That all of those sensations that I was feeling, and I had cold chills up my back and everything, those are our body's way of saying, you're in danger, you need to protect yourself. You need to run away really quickly. So the hyperventilating, the feelings like becoming hyper vigilant, those are all made to protect us, because our minds biggest concern is that we be able to protect ourselves. So it's not unusual that when we get triggered, that all of those sensations come back. But because we didn't put them away with a story, we put them away with other sensations that we had that may have just been occurring at the same time. For instance, something horrible happened to you while you were in fresh mowed grass in the evening time at dusk. And so being in that kind of light with the smell of fresh grown grass may trigger those sensations that you felt with the trauma, because your brain put them away together even though one didn't cause the other. When you feel one, you feel the other because they got shoved away together. So pulling out the sensations that you had during trauma and putting a story to them so they can be stored properly is what's healing.
So, Miss Linda, what will be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
I, I think my short term and long term goals for this book, I'm really happy that in my life I was able to take this knowledge that I gained, the learning that I gained through therapy, and put it in a book so that it's there recorded for somebody else. And I hope the long term goal is, people have said to me that this is a book um, unlike other books because usually you don't have somebody detailing how you change in therapy. I had a New York psychiatrist say to me, I have never read a book where the client talked about the actual ways that you change your perspective, the, and you change your thinking. And that's what I do in the book, and people have connected with that. So I think I'm hoping my long-term goal for the book is that it just helps more people to understand what's going on with them when they're not being vulnerable and just hiding themselves, and how helpful really pursuing good therapy and staying with it can be. And long term for myself, I hope to keep writing.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Linda, and looking forward for more and more and more empowering books to come. So before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Movie 101 Review, in its third season, people, third season with Mr. Bob Lemon. Please do listen to our latest episode. We are talking about the film The Gorge. So please do listen. Movie 101 review wherever you listen your podcast. So Miss Linda, what is the most significant insight you gain from your experience that you like readers to remember?
I think something that hit me when I was sitting in therapy is that we are not here to do life alone, that we need to turn to other people. We need to be brave enough to talk to them and to really reveal ourselves. And the other thing is that my experience of going through something hard was just my experience of a hard situation, but that's where we learn and grow. And there isn't one person on this earth who hasn't had some kind of really hard situation in their life. But I really think that's by design, because that's where we grow and become wiser, become more the people that we're meant to be. So I encourage people not to just stay comfortable, but to um, really pursue those difficult moments in life and go through them and let them help you grow.
Miss Linda Feig Knipe, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Sure. My book is Braving Therapy. Um, you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any place where you get your books. Um, You can find me on, I have a website, lfeigknipe.com, or my Facebook page is L period Feig Knipe.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Linda Feig Knipe, because if you support her, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Linda, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's been a pleasure.
Maricon people, see you soon.